こんにちは、皆さん。ビジネスサクセスジャパンのポッドキャストへようこそ。Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Business Success Japan podcast. This is your host, Lydia Buchleman. My main goal here is to create an easily accessible resource for those who want to develop Japan-specific communication skills, especially in business. While I can't and won't promise to make you fluent in Japanese, I hope that you will walk away from each episode with a skill, piece of information, or shift in mindset that will help you be more effective in your interactions with Japanese business people. In today's episode, Mac of the travel company Maction Planet shares his insights into how best to navigate professional and personal relationships as a foreigner in Japan. You may have noticed that this topic has been a common thread throughout many of the episodes in this podcast, but that's simply because it's such a core aspect of doing business in Japan that it's almost impossible to overstate its importance. But before we get into today's episode, let's go over a little bit of Japanese. In the previous episode, we went over a phrase that is useful when going out for a drink in Japan, as it's pretty much just the Japanese equivalent of the English phrase, cheers. Kanpai. Ka. N. Pa. I. Kanpai. Today, I'll teach you a word that is brought up a few times in our conversation, which is the Japanese word for foreigner or someone from another country. Gaijin. Ga-i-jin. Gaijin. The kanji, or Chinese characters that make up this word, are simply the characters for outside and person. Check out the description of this episode if you're interested in what those characters look like. Another common variation of this word with pretty much the same meaning puts the character for country between the other two characters, resulting in something that looks like outside country person. Gaikokujin. So just be aware that if you hear the word gaikokujin, it means pretty much the same thing as gaijin. But gaijin is used in this conversation, so be sure to listen for that in this episode. And without any more delay, let's get into today's conversation. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, Matt?
Hi, Lydia. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to join your fantastic podcast. I've loved listening to it. So I'm Mac, and I've been living in Japan for 14 years now. I came here, first of all, in 2006, in August 2006. So pretty much, as we're recording this, my 14-year anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you very, very much. When I first moved here, I was an actuary. So I was working in the insurance industry, and then I moved into finance. And about 3 years ago, I left that to start my own travel company, which is called Maction Planet, which specializes in bespoke Japan tours and experiences, primarily in Tokyo, but increasingly all around the country.
Why did you decide to settle in Japan then? That's a pretty big move.
Yeah, it certainly is. So my history with Japan actually goes all the way back to 2002. I came here on holiday for 17 days during the World Cup. If your listener base is primarily in the country in which you currently reside, Lydia, then I should probably say the Soccer World Cup, just to be very specific. But that tournament was actually split between Japan and South Korea. And I followed the England team all around Japan for 17 days. And I fell in love with the country. Or more specifically, I fell in love with Tokyo. And I just, almost on arrival to Tokyo, the legend goes that I emerged from the Narita Express at Ikebukuro station where we were staying. And I looked around the fairly nondescript, bus station outside one of the exits. And I turned to my friend who I was traveling with and said, I'm going to live here one day. And sure enough, I was very luckily able to make that dream come true. I was training to be an actuary. So I accelerated through the exams. I qualified in November 2005. I spent about 2 weeks in a drunken stupor and then emerged from that haze and immediately emailed a recruitment consultant to set things in motion to try to find a job in Tokyo.
So what made you decide to switch careers altogether then?
Okay, well, I've always wanted the challenge of running my own business.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely one of the big drivers for kind of moving out of, working for the man, and then moving to becoming an entrepreneur or solopreneur or whatever the current buzzword is for that. The second thing is I love travel. I've been to 108 countries, and for me, Japan is number one. But, I've traveled by myself, I've traveled with friends, I've traveled on group tours, I've traveled on private tours, I've traveled, in a couple. So I've experienced a ton of travel. Obviously, I have my own ideas about, how to maximize people's experiences. So I wanted to bring that to the table as well. And the third aspect is that I am a massive Tokyoite. I'm a massive Tokyophile. And I wanted so much to share, my passion for what I always term the world's greatest metropolis with people. So the intersection of kind of those three threads is how we ended up with Maction Planet.
So why Tokyo in particular? What made you love Tokyo so much that you decided to stay here?
It's an excellent question, Lydia, and it's one that I have a very well-rehearsed answer to because, to put into context, for example, in 2019, I was literally guiding on average for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. So I was very lucky that things had gone very well for myself and for Maction Planet. And of course, every new guest asks that same question. But so basically, I always talk about the 5 factors for me. And we'll start off with the 2, which are the most boring, rather like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they are the safety and the efficiency. For me, as I expect for most people on Earth, personal safety is very important. And I just love that feeling that, when you're walking around Tokyo, whatever time of day it is, random street crime, it's not impossible, but it's very unlikely to happen to you. I'm sure you understand what I mean there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second aspect is the efficiency. The things work here. Whether we're talking about the Shinkansen, the JR Tokai who run, the Tokaido Shinkansen, the one that a lot of visitors to Japan will have taken from here towards Kyoto. The average delay per train on that thing, in 2018 was basically something like 15 seconds, which is, it's just insane to think they're running these things, these 16 carriage trains. I think there are 12 an hour between 4:20 and 8:20 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. So they're running them at the same frequency that many countries, wish they could run their subway systems at.
Mm-hmm.
And everything works, if you want to get something delivered to your home, in the UK, you basically have to take a week off work and hope that you're not otherwise engaged or sitting on the toilet when the guy rings, because you'll not see that package again for another 3 weeks. But, in Japan, you can specify 2-hour slots and the people will arrive within that 2 hours. So those things, the safety and the efficiency, they remove 90% of the stress of, for me, living in, pretty much any other big city. And then once you've addressed that, you have a lovely foundation to enjoy, the 3 things which life is about, which is people, food, and the culture. The people are fantastic here, and we're obviously going to be talking about that today as we get into the subject of relationships. But, the people in Japan are just, they're just wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
The food is incredible, whether you're talking about the Michelin stars, Tokyo has more Michelin stars than Paris and New York combined, all the way down to the BQ gourmet, the ramen, the tonkatsu, the okonomiyaki. Everything is fabulous here. Plus, we have a huge amount of wonderful international food as well. And then the culture. And I actually have changed a little bit. Culture is the one-word answer, but I like to call it things to do. Because when you say culture, people kind of immediately think, oh, Japanese culture, swords and tea ceremony. And of course, that itself is absolutely fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I have huge passion for that. Then, of course, there's modern Japanese culture, be it anime and manga and robots. and the kawaii culture as well. But then, for me, like I say, it's more than that. It's about the things to do. I think a famous man once said, bored of Paris, bored of life, and he just got the city wrong. For me, it's bored of Tokyo, bored of life. If you wake up in this great city and you can't think of something that you love, that is on, whether it's sport related, art related, horticulture, gardens related, food related, beer related, every aspect of what you love to do is catered for in this city in such depth, and there's just nowhere like it on earth, in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I don't know if you're able to speak to this in particular, but do you think it has anything to do with the collector culture there? Because people tend to have very specific interests and they dive really deep into them. That's just a trend that I've heard a lot. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I do. I think you're alluding to, some of the fantastic places that we have, whether it's collecting vinyl records, right? I think we have some of the still functioning best cassette shops in the world. Some of your some of your younger listeners will be familiar with cassettes from such documentaries like Guardians of the Galaxy. But I mean, it's incredible, and I think it's related. We can draw all sorts of lines and cultural threads going back centuries. You can bring in the concept of shokunin, whatever it is. It's definitely a society where when people are into something, they are into it, I'm a big member of the baseball community here. Specifically, I'm a huge supporter of the Tokyo Yakult Swallows. And, for the people I sit with, it's a passion in a way that's actually difficult for, even the most passionate sports fans in some other countries to really relate to. So, yes, I think whether it's food, whether it's art, whether you're into kites and you've just decided, I'm going to set up the Japan Kite Museum, and this is going to be the world's best place to go to see kites. All of that brings this incredible diversity to the world's greatest metropolis.
It's just a very unique situation to be in, to literally be able to do almost anything you want any day, just hopping on the train.
Yeah, and knowing that you'll be able to get there on time, and that you're not going to be mugged on the subway while you do it. So. Right. I mean, it sounds like this utopia or dystopia, but it really is wonderful. I mean, I could give thousands of examples of just having had the most amazing days here because you can rely on the system. In fact, I'll give you one right now. So one of my very best friends from school, a guy who I've now known for 30 years, came to visit me with his partner. And on the Friday, we decided to go up to Nikko. Now, one of the main sites of Nikko, we went down to try to get in. And the last entry was 3:30. And of course, it was 3:31. And, we got the X, the muddy, the X that, you sometimes get when you're trying to blag your way in. But no, we were 1 minute late. There was no chance of that. So, we went for dinner. We were staying in a ryokan. And I started to think, well, hang on, our train tomorrow is at 8:52, leaving from Nikko to go back to Tokyo. And I thought, well, this place opens at 8, and therefore we have time to visit, right? And it's a sort of, it was tight, but nowhere else would I even have thought about attempting that, 8 o'clock meant it was going to open at 8. And I knew that, therefore, if we were there at 7:59, then we would be able to get there. So, I set things into motion. We took a cab from our accommodation to this site, and we were there indeed 1 minute before, and we walked quickly once we were in, and then we came out and we went straight to the cab rank, and then we got a cab and we went and picked up our bags, and then we were at the train station at 8:48 in time for our 8:52 train. and off we went back to Tokyo. But kind of the planning didn't end there, because then we went back from Asakusa Station to drop bags off at my then apartment in Yoyogi, and then we went out all the way to the west side of Tokyo to Chofu to watch a football match, to watch FC Tokyo. And the game kicked off at 2 p.m. and we were indeed able to very happily make kickoff, and even had time to have some lunch on the way as well. So then we watched a soccer match from 2 o'clock, finished just before 4. And then we, legged it, as it were, to the station and made our way all the way across from West Tokyo now to Disneyland. So we got to Maihama Station and we went to see the Cirque du Soleil show, Z, which started at 6 p.m. And again, we were able to make it in time and were able to have a drink and then watch the show and then had dinner there. And then by this point, it was only 9 p.m. or so. So then we were able to come back to, Shibuya and have a great night out.
Yeah, that's a perfect illustration of it. Just the sheer predictability of what you're going to be experiencing logistic-wise is a major thing that you don't have to worry about. And then you can actually enjoy what you're doing. So I definitely appreciate that too.
Yeah, you can enjoy what you're doing and then you can plan around it, and you can therefore maximize, the things that you're going to do, cross-country, or cross-city dashes. Because like, oh, well, this is going to take me 2 hours and 7 minutes. So, well, I'm going to, use this time on the train to read or do some admin. And then when I emerge, I can get on with my life. So it's absolutely fantastic.
Mm-hmm. So switching gears a little bit, you've had kind of the professional experience in Japan working for the man and then also moving into working for yourself. But can you tell us a little bit about the differences between professional relationships that you've had in Japan versus maybe other cultures and contexts that you've experienced?
Sure. Very good question, Lydia. The first thing to say is that, Japan is a country on planet Earth populated by human beings. And I know that may sound like a very sort of obvious or trite way to begin. But as we know, human beings have huge levels of commonality. Mm-hmm. In his great book, Subliminal, Leonard Molyneux presents some of the countless evidence that sociologists have come up with that shows that, a Japanese man and an American man have much more in common in terms of values than a Japanese man and a Japanese woman, or an American man and an American woman. Do you know what I'm trying to say here? That basically, human beings are human beings, and we sometimes we look for the differences, between America, France, Japan, China, but at the end of the day, we all want the same things. Now, having said that, understanding the nuances of the remaining, let's call it 10% that are those cultural differences is hugely important in terms of relationship building here, and also maximizing your experience, I guess, in any country you live. And, because Japan, on many of kind of the sociological charts, is at one extreme relative to some kind of the Anglo-American axis, then it makes it more important, I think, than in some other countries. So to pick up on some specifics there, number one, for me, it's always been the most important thing here, which is respect. And respect is obviously very important all over the earth. But here, I've just found in my experience that, respect as a concept is much more deeply valued and much more subtle in the way that it's expressed. The second one I would touch on is FaceTime in a working environment, understanding just how important that is. And maybe the third one I'd like to bring up at this point is the language. And I'm not talking here about needing to be, 100% fluent before you move here, but understanding how the language works, understanding that there is a difference between low context languages like English and high context languages like Japanese, will definitely help you navigate some of the misunderstandings that can potentially arise.
Right. I definitely agree with that. That's why I have very strong opinions in this area myself, but what would you say to somebody who maybe has heard that, oh, you don't really need to learn Japanese because Japanese people will be able to speak English well enough, and or, oh, I'll just get an interpreter and it'll be fine?
I think you just can't underestimate the benefits of knowing at least at some level of the language, and it ties in. All of these three things are connected, of course. So when I first moved here, I started learning Japanese, and that itself showed the respect to my coworkers. That I was here and I was doing my best to assimilate myself into the culture and into the country. And it will help you, like I say, understand potential misunderstandings. So, you do not need fluency, but what you do need to know, I mean, again, this may come across as a little bit of a cliche, but you need to understand, as I did when I tapped one of the members of my team in my first job on the shoulders, and I said, we need this done. And he said, Chotto musukashi, you need to, and I had learned the word chotto, and I was learning adjectives at the time, and I had learned musukashi, and I thought, wow, it's a little difficult. Well, that's the joy of life. But
Ganbatte.
yes, yeah. So well done, mate. I mean, it can't all be easy. But no, he was telling me that it was absolutely bloody 100% impossible, and. So, and that's a simple example, but it illustrates, the bigger battle that you're facing. And so any kind of incremental knowledge that you can get is really going to help you a huge amount.
So these three things that you mentioned, respect, FaceTime at work, specifically in language, they all seem pretty straightforward. Is there anything that makes it particularly challenging for foreigners to build relationships in Japan?
Sure. Again, just to reiterate my point, because I want to give people listening to this, some confidence. I don't. Things have changed a little bit now. There of course is a huge proliferation of English language information about Japan. Podcasts like what you're doing, Lydia, I think are hugely helpful. I wish that I was able to listen to you and your guest back in 2006, right? So, things have changed a lot, and you are now, if you're planning to move to Japan right now, you're armed with a lot more resources than we had back 10, 15, 20 years ago. I've spoken with and read a lot of comments kind of online by numerous foreigners living in Japan who lament how hard it is to connect with Japanese people on a deep level, be it personal, professional relationships, right? And many say that forging close relationships is difficult. And becoming part of, say, a Japanese circle of friends is even harder. I personally have really never felt this way. And I really want your listeners to understand that. I want to sort of push aside some of this, messaging that you sometimes get that, that your life here may be very, very difficult and you'll have to spend all your time in the American club. Of course, that there are people I've struggled to connect with deeply here, but I can say that in the UK, and I can say that in all of the 108 countries that I've visited. The truth now is that some of my closest friends in the world are Japanese, and some of the best working relationships I've ever had are here. So, are there any secret techniques to that? I think you really shouldn't move here unless you have a fondness for Japan, I mean, of course, you may be sent here by your company on an assignment, and that just is what it is, and that's part of life. But actually having a love for being here is really going to help you, not take offense to some of the things that you may take offense to. It's going to help you find a sense of humor in some of the situations that may arise. So, I mean, here's one example which relates to the FaceTime issue, right? I remember I was kind of a functional manager of a team of about 20, all Japanese people in my first job here. And we were all working late. Now that I've got no chance of being fired from that job, I will admit that I was enjoying life having moved to this country, and there may have been some drinking involved. There may have been a little bit of slacking involved. So I had to actually catch up with some work. And so I was late in the office, and it was about 10 p.m. and pretty much everybody else was there still at 10 p.m. Now, I needed to go to the restroom, and it was a little bit cooler in the office. I think instinctively I took my jacket off the back of my chair, and I went to the restroom and, thoroughly washed my hands, even though it was pre-COVID, and then came back, and everybody had disappeared. Literally, the entire team had left the office in that 10-minute gap. And I suddenly realized what they meant when they said, wow, they really do stay until the boss leaves. And, I just didn't know what to think. I thought, but of course, because I was so happy to be in this place that had been my goal to move to for 4 years. I just found the whole situation hilarious. I was like, yes, the stereotypes and the cliches are happening to me. It was a real source of pride. So, I went back to my work and I stayed there till midnight because I needed to get some stuff done, and off I went. And the next day, I was able to come in and we all had a little joke about it in the team. And also, if you demonstrate that fondness, people are, we talk about human beings, right? I mean, I think human beings have huge instinctual capacity to understand, the person's heart, the kokoro, as it were, right? The spirit. You know what I mean? The connection that you have, regardless of language, right? You can tell when somebody's not into what they're talking about. You can tell when somebody is really happy and when they're pretending to be happy. I've heard some stories about, for example, as horse meat is eaten in Japan. Mm-hmm. Where I think it isn't eaten as commonly in the US. And, you're going to be taken out to an izakaya, probably as some kind of, welcome party, or you're going to be drinking and doing, nomikai with your work colleagues, and horse meat's going to be served up. And of course, you don't have to eat it, right? But the way you handle that situation is going to affect people's perceptions of you. And there are ways to handle it that show respect, and there are ways to handle it that show less respect or none at all. That's going to be a huge factor in your life. Whether you can find ways to communicate, even when your language skills are poorer, that still allow you to connect with people.
Right, I definitely agree with that. There's a lot more to communication than just the language.
You're absolutely right, Lydia. It reminds me of a story from 2010. I've been a fan of the Tokyo Yakult Swallows that I mentioned, my baseball team, since 2006. And for the first 3.5 years of my support, I was kind of watching by myself or bringing friends along. And then in 2010, I became part of a group. And the leader of that group, Yamada-san, is one of my favorite human beings on earth. A 67-year-old grandmother by day, baseball hooligan by night. And at the time, in 2010, my Japanese was not as good as it is now. Now, the other bit of background you need for this story is that when the Tokyo Yakult Swallows score a home run, we sing a song, the Tokyo Ondo, which is actually a traditional song often sung during Bonodori, those kind of summer dancing festivals that we do, where everybody does the same moves as we go around the yagara, the stand in the middle that has the musicians. And we sing that song whenever we score a home run, or during the Lucky Seven, which is the equivalent of the 7-inning stretch that you have in the US. And so I've just joined this group, and we were playing our crosstown rivals, the Yomiuri Giants. And we scored a home run, and I started, like everybody else, we wave these mini umbrellas around. I know it sounds surreal to anybody who's not seen it. There's plenty of videos on YouTube. So we start waving these mini umbrellas around while singing the Tokyo Ondo. And there I was singing very loudly, especially loudly because we were playing the Giants. And I only found out years later that Yamada-san turned to another member of our group, and she said to him, wow, Mac sings the Tokyo Ondo really passionately. Do you know why? And he didn't. But, that was, a key part in building my relationship with Yamada-san, even before we could communicate more fluently, was just the fact that she could detect, my true love for this team. I wasn't just a tourist or somebody who was coming along going, ah, look at this. Oh, look, these guys wave umbrellas around when they score a home run, you know, taking a ton of videos and photos and then never coming again. And so, you know, consistency and passion are going to be very, very important parts of building your relationships here.
So then on the other side, are there any things that foreigners might actually have an advantage in this area, despite having these big cultural differences?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's said sometimes that it might even be tougher to be Japanese in Japan than it is to be foreign here. Because, you know, unlike me, they have to live with Japan's social pressure cooker every day. I sometimes really don't envy some of my Japanese friends, especially in the professional environment. And I am thankful that I'm not held to the same strict standards as they are. You will be given a Gaijin pass. Nobody expects you to, you know, fully understand, at least certainly in your initial period here, the exact number of times or the depth that you need to bow, you know, when it's appropriate to leave a situation, when it's appropriate to speak in a situation. However, the nature of the pass that you get is going to depend on you specifically. That's why it can be hard to speak generally. And, you know, you can only really speak, I think, anecdotally about this, and specifically, you know, me talking about my experience or the experience of foreigners within my circle, both professionally and personally, because the nature of the passes that you get are going to really depend very specifically on you, and how you've built up your relationships and how you've built up, you know, those connections. And also they're going to depend on your counterparty. So if I think back to my period within the finance industry, I was an analyst covering financial companies here. And the companies I dealt with were hugely different. Some of them were big conglomerates that had made a lot of international acquisitions overseas. Some of them were still very, very domestic focused companies. And my relationship at any given time with them, I was me doing what I thought was the same thing, but you know, the connections that I had depended very much on also their international mindset as well. So it's going to be a two-way street. It's going to be what you bring to the situation, but it's also going to very much depend on your counterparties. You know, whether you're working in a much more domestic environment, you're going to get much less of a Gaijin pass, or whether, you know, as the world changes and globalization continues, you know, people are going to understand different ways of working.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. So it's best to be aware that you will encounter Gaijin passes, but you should definitely not rely on them to get you through, because they will not always work. And what's nice about the Gaijin pass is that if you are with somebody who maybe doesn't expect you to do these things, but then you come out and do them pretty well, then that just shows that deep respect that you need to help build a relationship going forward. So if you don't use the Gaijin pass, that's great too.
That's a very, very eloquent way of summing up, yeah, the concept of the Gaijin pass and how you're going to be building relationships in Japan. You know, back in 2011, obviously the tragic events of March 11th of that year up in Tohoku with the earthquake, the tsunami, and the Fukushima disaster. As a result of that, the baseball season start was postponed by about a month or so. And all of the games for the first month switched to being day games so that we could save power, because a lot of Tokyo's power actually came from the Fukushima power plant. So they didn't want to use the floodlights. So I remember turning up to the first of those games. And one of the members of our group, Mikami-san, he turned to me and he said, "Mac, what are you doing here?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I'm hearing on the news many foreigners are leaving Japan." If you remember at that time, the term fly-jin had been coined.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, from obvious origins, to describe people who were just upping and leaving Tokyo, you know, and moving to Hong Kong, moving to Singapore, or going back to their home countries, either temporarily or permanently. And I said to him, absolutely no way, you know, this is my home. And then I turned to him and I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, this is my home." And I kind of said, "Touche." And then we hugged each other, and there was which is very rare actually in Japan, as you know. Hugging is not a common thing, and there were a few tears exchanged as well. So if you're able to just really treat this place with the respect it deserves, as your home, whether it's permanent or whether it's temporary, then people will respond. And all those comments that you read online about not being able to develop deep relationships, I absolutely guarantee you that you will have a totally different, much more positive experience here.
So then, are there any specific things that you do to cultivate and maintain professional relationships in Japan? Because like you said, you can't go around hugging people, especially in a professional context. So what practices do you incorporate, especially maintaining professional relationships?
Sure. It depends on what your goals are, obviously. So some of these are going to be, things that you can apply, I think, not just in Japan, but also just generally if you're somebody who wants to improve their professional relationships. Concepts that kind of come to mind are very much, I know it's a dirty word, but networking, whether it's internally within your company or externally as well. One kind of just concept, I think there's a book with this title, but like a lot of business books these days, the title tends to give away the entirety of the 200 pages. And that is Never Lunch Alone. I'm going to summarize this book for you guys, okay? Never Lunch Alone.
Amazing.
That's it. It's a bit like, as a slight aside, Lydia, if I may, the book Minimum Viable Product.
Right, yeah.
Launch a minimum viable product. If it doesn't work, launch another one. Thank you very much. We're done here. So I've just saved the audience 400 pages of reading there. So when you advertise this podcast, please make sure in the notes that the potential listeners understand this huge value add that we've just achieved. But anyway, back to the matter at hand. With Never Lunch Alone, I think internally, that's huge. That is huge. And you should be doing it with your juniors, you should be doing it with your peers, and you should be doing it with your seniors as well. And you, of course, need to then extend that. It is true, I think, that the after evening drinks around alcohol, in my experience, even now that I've moved out of the finance world and moved into tourism, they still do form a big part of relationship building in Japan. Less so than 10 years ago, less so than 20 years ago. Corporate budgets are being reduced. So in terms of the group outings, that is changing. But I'm sure you'll agree, Lydia, that it's still, I think, a core part of relationship building here.
Yeah, it's not something that, well, you can get around it. You don't have to participate. It's just the payoff is so much bigger in terms of building relationships than events maybe without alcohol.
Yeah, it's sort of tough, right? Because there's in a world where we're all trying to work on our reductions of discrimination and barriers to entry, whatever they may be. It's sad for me to say that the alcohol fueled evening meetings are going to be very important, but they just are. So when I was trying to build relationships with companies, to persuade them, for example, to let the CEOs or CFOs of those companies go on the road with us. So, with the securities houses which I work for, to allow their senior management to come and tour and visit different investors around the world. Without a doubt, taking them out for drinks in the evening, often multiple times as well. Relationships not just built in a couple of hours. Bonenkai, Shinnenkai, all of that hugely, hugely important. Maybe just something more generally for me now, I think as an entrepreneur, I think it's very important to be front of mind with people. And, LinkedIn, I found to be incredibly helpful. I know that's how me and you connected, Lydia. And it just, what you want often in business, you just want as many potential opportunities and avenues of that business to come to you. So the more potential chances you have to be front of mind with people who suddenly, in my case, think, oh yeah, we work at the Swiss embassy and, we've got these guys coming in and we need somebody to show them around Tokyo. Oh yeah, I heard about that guy, Mac, he has 285 5-star reviews on TripAdvisor. Shameless plug, but you know what I mean. Then I think it's very, very important. So now connecting more generally online, I think is becoming more important. And I'm seeing it becoming more important also for my Japanese connections as well. I think they were a little bit later to that game, as it were, than maybe in the US or the UK, but it's definitely becoming much more important now.
I think for some reason, Facebook became the avenue that people put their businesses on, but now they are slowly starting to move over to LinkedIn, which is great for me because my Facebook is not professional.
Yeah, it's kind of strange. You have kind of pages. There was always that distinction, wasn't there, on Facebook? Your personal profile, right? The Lydia page, as it were, is going to be very personal, right, on Facebook. And maybe for me, I have a business, Maction Planet, and that's very specifically my business. But I think LinkedIn allows you also, especially where you are your brand, as in your case, as in my case, it kind of allows that blurring a little bit, which I think really helps.
Mm-hmm, for sure. So then for somebody who's just getting started, who's new to Japan, do you have any specific small recommendations that they could start incorporating in their own routines to help develop these relationships?
That's a very, very good question. I think just beginning to do your language learning is going to help. I know language learning is always a very, very daunting thing. It's huge, but it's like everything. It's like working out. It's like building a network. You just have to try to learn those 5 new words a day, or that one grammar point a week, whatever it is. And then, a year later, you're going to look back and you're going to be light years ahead of where you could have conceived that you would be. So I know the Japanese language is perceived to be very difficult, and that's because it really is very bloody difficult. But, just learning those basic kanji, again, we're not talking about fluency here, right? We're just talking about small things that will help you, when you get your feet on the ground here, navigate a little bit better. And I'm telling you this, by the way, as somebody who moved to this country with no language skill whatsoever. When I made it my goal in 2002 to move here, of course, the intention was to learn the language, but at the same time, I was also trying to do what is sometimes regarded as one of the hardest professional qualifications on earth in half the time. So that's my excuse, while at the same time juggling a social life in London in my early 20s. So I came here with 0 language skills. And I've got to say, to this day, I regret it. The second thing that will help, and it's much more fun, is familiarize yourself with Japanese culture. Go and read The Tale of Genji. It's a fabulous book, and it's also the world's first novel. It will take you a long time to do, but it's going to give you amazing, amazing insight into the culture here. Go and watch, on the other end of the scale, fast forwarding 1,000 years, go and watch, My Neighbor Totoro and all of those amazing Miyazaki films. Watch Shin Godzilla. All of this stuff is going to give you great, great grounding in the kind of, the language. One of the things, when we talk about language fluency often around the world, I've seen this in some of the countries where I've spent protracted lengths of time. If you, Lydia, move to Singapore, you can speak the language, but you're not going to have the same commonality of basis that Singaporeans will have, right? Mm-hmm. If you say something and you tell me a story about a mistake that you made, and I say, "Oh," then we know where that comes from, right? We immediately have a common language of The Simpsons there. Mm-hmm. When you're coming here to Japan, you're not going to be able to learn 30 years of kind of cultural immersion. But anything that you can do is going to help you. The music is also a great one. Myself and my resident DJ, Maction Planet's resident DJ, Royce Leong, actually run a Japanese music podcast, which we host on Mixcloud platform, which we call Tokyo On. We have over 60 episodes on there. What we do within 30 minutes is we play 6 songs, and then we then chat around those songs, whether it's the culture that the song is talking about, whether it's the artists themselves, whether it's the location where that song is set. So that's I've been told, because I've recommended it to people who are about to move, and they've found it immensely useful. That's going to give you a great, great grounding in Japanese music. And not a lot of foreigners take the time to actually learn about Japanese music. So, if you're there and you're able to, tell your Puffy apart from your Baby Metal, then you're going to get a lot of respect.
Yeah, it definitely goes back to what you said earlier about the importance of having some sort of affection for the country. It's just so easy to find something to love in Japan, because if it's not pop culture, which there's a lot of it, there's a lot of different areas, you can almost definitely find something you would like in pop culture. It's such an old country that you have thousands of years of culture to potentially pull from. You can definitely find something you love about the country, and that will help you both learn about the country on a more deep level and then build relationships because you can find people to talk to about it.
100%. You know, you've got swords, you've got bonsai, you've got kabuki, theater. And then on top of that, you've also got the international culture. You could live a really good life here if all you loved was burgers. You could become part of the, the very nerdy, I'm not saying I'm a member, or am I, of the, the Tokyo very nerdy burger community, right? Always checking out new spots, places that have a burger on the menu but don't really show up as burger restaurants. There's huge opportunities for you to whatever it is you love. You're going to find a community for it in this city and in this country.
So don't be shy about exploring your interests, for sure.
Absolutely not.
So then for somebody who may be considering themselves as more of a veteran in Japan, they kind of understand how to connect with people and get around. Are there any more advanced tips that you would give them, something to maybe level up their professional relationships in Japan?
Excellent question, Lydia. I think the advice I'm about to give is probably the same advice that you would actually get in any kind of working environment, which is, investing in the people around you, fairly selflessly as well. So, help them and support them, and people will recognize that's what you've been doing, and you will create that, positive vibe around you that will benefit you, whether you're working in the professional environment for the man or whether you're an entrepreneur. So one thing I try to do now with Maction Planet is I'm always trying to promote my collaborators. The goal is not really any kind of financial gain, although you do find you will get financial benefits in general, overall, from operating in this way, not necessarily specifically from that specific interaction that you've had. But I'm always trying to promote, chefs I love, restaurants I love, people who run great websites who I respect, like Chris Nilg at TDR Explorer, always trying to give people a platform to showcase what they do. And, you will find that karma comes around and it will benefit you in the long run.
Yeah, that's so great. So then do you have a personal example of a communication breakdown in Japan due to cultural differences?
When I was working for one of the investment banks, the chairman of the bank actually came to the country, to the Tokyo office, and I was taking him around Tokyo to some meetings. And he'd come to Japan many times and purported to be a Japanophile and purported to be somewhat of a fan and reader of the culture here. So we were about to get into a taxi. Now, in Japan, the most important person in your group, let's say you have 3 passengers, you may expect as a foreigner that the most important person sits shotgun, as it were, right, in the front next to the driver. Actually, the most important person in Japan sits behind the driver. Now, as you know, the doors of a taxi in Japan only open on the curbside, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the person who sits behind the driver has to kind of get in first and then sidle across the back seat. So I was taking the chairman around, and the chairman and I are about to take a taxi. The door swings open, and I'm thinking, well, he's the most important person, so he should get in first. And I'm waiting, and I'm waiting. And, after this, I guess what may have been 10 seconds, but, these things last an eternity when you're a junior and a little bit nervous. He said, "What the hell are you doing, Mac?" And I said, "I'm waiting for you to get in." And he said, "Mac, I rarely pull rank, but there's no way I'm sidling across this back seat, potentially ripping my pants, in order to get in behind the driver. You go." So when I went, and then he got in, and then I spent the remainder of the cab journey explaining what it was that was going through my mind that led to this misunderstanding. And so this is maybe not the story you're expecting, because this is not a communication breakdown between myself and a Japanese person. This is a communication breakdown between me as an inhabitor of Japan, understanding Japanese culture, and somebody who I thought did, but came from overseas, and the gap in what was expected should happen there. But of course, the chairman also had a learning point there, because then the next taxi journey we took was with the two of us and a guest. And so he was able to quickly learn that actually, you know, we needed to put the guest in, you know, behind the driver, and he should sit in the back with him, and I should sit in the front doing the kind of junior job of telling the taxi driver where to go.
Yeah, that's very interesting. There's just a lot of details that the more you can be aware of, the better off you'll be, but that doesn't mean that you won't have those experiences where there's still some amount of breakdown. So knowing more helps, but it doesn't necessarily prevent you from ending up in awkward and strange situations sometimes.
Oh, you're gonna find strange situations, whether it's a linguistic misunderstanding, a cultural misunderstanding, on both sides, actually. So, you know, I'd like to sort of flip your comment on its head, Lydia. It's not just going to be cultural breakdowns because of misunderstandings. You're also going to be able to get away with stuff that's kind of acceptable in Japanese culture that you would never be able to get away with, you know, in the West. So you may be familiar with the term inemuri, you know, the ability to sleep anywhere, which is definitely a superpower of the people here. You know, like I remember some of my analyst meetings, I can now confess, you know, dozing off after a big lunch, you know, and a mistimed meeting of 2 p.m. In very tight environments. You know, there was one or two people meeting within the company, and there was myself and maybe a colleague. And, you know, and falling asleep in a very confined environment like that would be the ultimate disrespect in a Western culture, right?
Yes.
But in some ways gained me more respect here, because it was a sign of, you know, how hard I was working that I was falling asleep. So I don't recommend you pull that. Do not listen to this and think, woohoo, post-lunch naps all the time. But, you know, something that would be very, very frowned upon in the West has a completely different interpretation here.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out as well. So then another very Western-based question, but if somebody was going to Japan for the first time and they could only know one thing, what would you want that one thing to be? What would you tell them?
That is an excellent question, Lydia. The advice I've given to people who have looked to me for mentorship when moving here in that vein has always been around, you know, parking your ego at the door. I think in the Western culture, we prize the individual self above the community. And Japan, the wa of the community is much more important than your own perspective on a situation or your own views on a particular matter. So park your ego at the door. When they're checking your certificate of eligibility at Narita Airport, you know, leave a little bit of the negative parts of your individuality at immigration and come here with an open mind and an open heart and an open spirit to try to understand Japan from Japan's perspective. And if you just come with that wide vision, then you're going to have a much, much easier time, both mentally, both emotionally, than so many foreigners who move here.
Yeah, I know from experience that kind of the harder you cling to yourself, your individuality, not that it's a bad thing, it's just if you are insistent, like, no, I am this, therefore I will only do these things, I will only say these things in this way, the harder time you'll have and the less that you'll grow while you're in the country, for sure.
I think it ties back to maybe a split in the interpretation of the word freedom. I want to make it very clear, by the way, that me and you are in total agreement. Absolutely nobody is suggesting leaving any kind of individuality at the door. In fact, you know, it's your personality and your passion for Japan that's going to get you places here. But that's where again we've conflated two terms, right? Ego and then individuality, right? They're separate things. What I'm saying is, in the UK, there are now silent carriages on the subway, but people on the whole, their phone will be on. If you send me a message, Lydia, my phone in the UK will go beep beep.
Mm-hmm.
In Japan, we have them all on silent modes. In fact, we call silent mode manner mode here, as in the word manner, M-A-N-N-E-R. Mind your manners. And so, isn't that an interesting thing? In the UK, I have the freedom to have my phone on. In Japan, I have the freedom from noise pollution, and I have the freedom to enjoy, a conversation without in a restaurant, or enjoy some quiet time on the train without 1,000 notification noises going off. And I definitely have just grown to really respect the freedom from that makes kind of life very peaceful in Japan. And I really, really admire that. And, I think being able to enjoy the fruits of that is one of the great benefits of moving to Japan. So park, a little bit of that ego at the door. Like I said, if you're served the horse meat, then respectfully decline it, but don't make anybody feel that they're a horrible person or they come from a horrible culture.
Yes, definitely don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. When you encounter a situation where, a shogunai situation, whether it's at the bank or at the kuyakusho, just take a step back, take a deep breath, understand that, there are now thousands of people who've moved to this country who've handled that situation, and you may just have to go back to the immigration office or wherever it is, again, the next week, once you've addressed their situation. So if you're able to do that, please come and move to this country. We want immigration in Japan. We need to offset our declining population. And we want people like our listeners to come and move here and have the most amazing experience in the greatest city on earth.
Yes, I love that. That's such a great place to end. So thank you so much for your time today, Mac.
My pleasure. Thank you, Lydia. It's been an honor being a guest on this fantastic podcast, and all the best to you in your future episodes.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Thank you very much.
I hope that you enjoyed today's conversation. Please be sure to check out the links in the description of this episode to learn more about Mac and Maction Planet. But for now, remember that the more you learn, the more confident you will become as you explore all of the opportunities Japan has to offer you. So, if you found the information here today useful, be sure to subscribe for more Japanese language and cultural guidance. And if you enjoy the podcast and want to hear more content in the future, please go ahead and leave a rating or a review. It really helps other people find the show. And of course, if you have any other questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes or interview topics, or if you'd like to contribute as a guest on the podcast to share your own cultural insights into doing business in Japan, please email me at businesssuccessjapan@gmail.com. Until next time, mata kondo!